Hey everybody. I am interested in telling a story about hang gliding, and in particular, a story about one flight. But in order to get there, I kind of had to back up just a bit, maybe a lot. To say that I was obsessed with the idea of soaring is, well, it misses the mark. And I got it. I got that bug big time from my father, who, as long as I can remember, assembled free flight sailplanes. Everything from the kind that are 100% balsa, and you shape the wings, and you glue it all together, and you toss it with your hand to a 2-meter glider that is formed out of hundreds and hundreds of pieces of balsa and then covered with essentially tissue paper. And then that's covered with dope. This is a use of the word dope that may have been lost to time, but my first introduction to the idea of dope was of a kind of lacquer that to me smells a little bit like chemical bananas. Anyway, you would cover these models with this tissue paper and then paint this lacquer on it. And all of his models were free flight. In other words, this was well before radio control. And so you would just give these models a toss, and they were spectacular. They were spectacular. Anyway, if I can trace where I got the soaring bug, it's directly from that. The first time I saw hang gliding was actually in a magazine, and I think that it was National Geographic, but it may have been Time. I'm not certain. And it was in the mid-70s, give or take. And when I saw that article, I was electrified. I was infected beyond, I don't know how to put it. It reached down into my dreams, and that's what I wanted to do. It's what I wanted to be. It's what I wanted. It's what I wanted. So then fast forward. I'm all the way through college. I graduated in '85, got a job teaching high school, and then realized that was not going to pay for much, and then decided to go ahead and use the ticket for which I had paid. And I got a job in Columbus, Ohio, working for AT&T Network Systems. And it was during that time that I discovered Mike Delsignore. Mike Delsignore was this amazing guy who was teaching hang gliding from a tiny, and I mean a tiny little hill. I'm going to say 60 feet tall. Northeast of Akron, Ohio. So in the winter of, that would have been 86, I began driving from Columbus up to Akron, Ohio every weekend. And I would run off the side of this little tiny hill over and over and over again and try to dodge the cows that were in the bottom and the electric fence that was just a little further down. But it was hang gliding, even if I was 2 feet off the ground, and I was doing it. I was doing it, and then the summer of '87, Mike took his then group of, or his latest group of students. I later learned that he did this over and over and over again, out to the point of the mountain, Utah, which, by the way, is about 10 miles to the south of us right now. And the point of the mountain, Utah, was a mecca of hang gliding, a real mecca of hang gliding. And by that time, I had bought my first hang glider, my first harness, my first emergency parachute, all of it. And I just slept on the point of the mountain for a week. And all I did was hang glide. And of course, at the point of the mountain, you can get high. Much higher than the 2 feet off the ground that I had recently experienced. At the end of that vacation, I went back home to Ohio, and I told my girlfriend, Kim Pennington, who, by the way, is now my wife, I have to go do this. I have to go live there. So we packed up. She came with me. She had just finished her teaching degree. And we moved here. We first got a crappy apartment, and then a couple of years later we got married and we bought this house that we now live in. And I began hang gliding all over the West, all over. I've hang glided from the dunes of Kitty Hawk. I've hang glided in Ohio. I've hang glided in a dozen or more places here in Utah, thrown myself off of cliff faces and the peaks of mountains. I've flown in Colorado and Idaho and Wyoming and in the Owens Valley of California and from Fort Funston just below San Francisco. So that gives a bit of background for the actual story. In northern Utah, right at the very eastern edge where it butts up against Wyoming, there is a very, very green valley. It's really quite beautiful. It's super duper green because the Bear River, which at that point is not really a river of such, it's more like a creek, wanders through the center of it, and it literally goes back and forth and back and forth. And the farmers who live in the area, they dam the creek so that it floods out there, and it's the most amazing green place you can imagine. There are all kinds of birds out there, including cranes, sandhill cranes, that are amazing. They make this sound that's just incredibly eerie. Anyway, so there's this beautiful valley out there. To the west of the valley is, I guess I would call it the Wasatch proper. The Wasatch is the mountains here in Utah that form kind of the spine of the state. And on the other side of the valley is a kind of it's a 12-mile long ridge. At its highest, it's about I'm going to say 600 feet, and a big long chunk of it has a cliff about 300 feet high, give or take. And one of the summers that Mike Delsignore brought his students out, we went out there and we flew that ridge. And that's where the story really kind of takes place. So let me continue to talk a little bit about what hang gliding, sort of the nuts and bolts of it, as it were. So the way you get up to the top of this ridge is you head directly toward this cliff that's about 600 feet tall. And you pass through a little keyhole notch until the dirt road goes to essentially the back side of the hill. And then you take this dirt road in an ever-climbing stair all the way up until you get to a swale, I guess I'll call it, which is kind of like a meadow on top of the ridge. But you're not to the top quite yet. You then drive your car along an ever more slender ridge line until you pass there's a little bit of a radio tower on the top, and then you get to the tippity top, which is a kind of rugged, rock-strewn area with some very, very low scrub brush. And when the wind blows directly at the face of the hill, the wind first compresses, as you might imagine, and then is forced up and over the top. And much like a standing wave, which, by the way, is a repeating a repeating thing in my life, much like a standing wave, you are able then to surf, is the best way of putting it. You are able to surf the air that is forced up and over the top. And the prep for launch is done on the immediate back side of the ridge in kind of a wind shadow. And so you take your 12-foot long, all rolled up, 60-pound hang glider, and you lay it on the ground, and then you spread its wings out and you stuff it full of battens. And then with the magic of some pulleys and some cables, you give it tension and it becomes a flying wing there in the quiet of this wind shadow. And then what you do is you hook in and you very, very carefully, 1 inch at a time, lift the glider up and begin to grunt and wrestle with it until it's into the driving wind. Now, in order for in order to soar there, you have to have something on the order of 14, give or take, mile an hour breeze. And the window can go all the way up to almost 20, but not quite. Yeah. To say that that period where you are grunting it over the top, and then about 10 feet down into the takeoff area, which, by the way, is about 20 feet long, and then there's a cliff. The manhandling of the glider into that takeoff area is fraught with danger. Because, A, you really need to be hooked in, of course, so you are attached to the glider. But if you let a wing come up inadvertently and the pressure zone wind catches it, it will turn you into sagebrush that rolls down, rolls up and over the top of the hill. And your launch needs to be very well coordinated. It's a super simple launch, really, because you take one step and you're airborne. And it's an immediate elevator. But it must be done with a great deal of care. So my friend Mike Delsignore turned me on to that place. Forward a couple of years, and I've flown there a dozen times. And then one morning I woke up, probably in July, and decided that I was going to go fly there alone. So I drove all the way out there. It's you have to drive to Evanston, Wyoming, and then north. You drive to a little town called Randolph. Randolph is all of about 10 homes. There is a burger joint in town. Then you head out. You head out across the farmers' fields on a dirt road, headed toward that keyhole. And I have my hang glider on the top of a Toyota two-wheel drive pickup truck. And I make my way up to the top, through the swale, past the radio tower, all the way up to the very, very tip top. And I unload the hang glider and I assemble the hang glider in the quiet of the wind shadow. And then I wait. I'm waiting for it to ease off a little bit. The wind was probably, I'm going to say 18 to 20, maybe 18 to 22. And I thought that was a bit too much for myself, just to do this alone. And then somewhere around 7:30 or maybe just 7, I'm not positive exactly what time it was, the wind began to ease up and it began to get perfect. And now is the time. So I hooked in and I began the grunting and whatever, inch by very careful inch, up to the peak, up to the rocky peak, and then inch by inch into the scree on the other side, into the area with the full-on pressure of the wind. All the time keeping the nose ultra, ultra low, which of course pushes the glider onto your shoulders super hard. And then I was ready. I was on top of a 12-mile long ridge with a 400-foot cliff about 20 feet down. There's no one anywhere near me. All there is just the green of the valley and the blue of the sky and the wind. I allowed the nose to come up just a little bit, just a little bit more, and then bam. I left the ground, and the glider began to fly, and within 2 seconds, I was 20 feet up. And within 5 seconds, I was 60 or 70 feet up and 60 or 70 feet out. And within about 2 minutes, I was probably 200 feet over the top of the mountain, flying in the most smooth air that you can ever really experience. Just smooth. The lift probably topped out, and when I say topped out, what I'm saying is the wave, as it went up and over the top of the hill, its peak area was probably 400 feet above the top of the hill. And I was able to fly all the way down to the south, probably, well, all the way until the ridge petered out. And I was able to fly almost all the way to the end of the northern point of the ridge. The northern point of the ridge really does not really keep its shape enough to allow you to fly all the way. And I proceeded to just enjoy myself for probably an hour and a half, just flying around. Again, it was the kind of lift that allowed you to fly with one hand, with one pinky. You could let go of the bar altogether, and if you wanted to, you could spin around under the glider. You could fly using its cables from the bottom of the bar. You could, it was just dreamy kind of flight. And then after an hour and a half or so, the wind speed began to kind of ease up just a bit. So the amount of altitude that I could maintain above the top, or basically the top of the wave, it began to get closer to the top of the mountain. Until I could really only stay about, I'm going to say 100 feet above the top of the hill, maybe even a little less. And if I flew away from the mountain out into the valley, of course, it fell off further. So there was this sweet zone, and the lift became even creamier. And then something happened that really haunts my dreams still. About a mile down the ridge, I saw what I first thought were hawks or eagles. They were very large black birds. And they were playing. There's no other word for it. They were circling in the lift, just like I was, and they were swooping and diving on one another like I had seen eagles do. And I thought, oh, I'll go down and I'll I'll check them out. So as I headed down there, I was looking hard at them, and I discovered, no, they're not eagles, they're buzzards. Now, I have lived with buzzards ever since I had moved as a child to Appalachia in Ohio, down near the river. In fact, I remember there's a town called Hinckley in Ohio that every March 15th, I think, waits for the buzzards to return. The buzzards returning to Hinckley. So this bird has also kind of haunted me my whole life. But here were buzzards that were exhibiting behavior that I had not seen. I had not seen before. They were playing. And as I got closer, they didn't stop. In fact, they didn't care. And then I was among them. Remember that the lift was so smooth, just caressing at this point. So I didn't really have to do very much at all in terms of inputs. And the circles that I was doing was just nudge it a bit and let it come all the way around. Just the most gentle kind of dance. And repeatedly, these buzzards would fly beneath me, 10 feet beneath me, or 10 feet out from the edge of my wing. I must have played with them for, I don't know. Probably it was only 10 minutes. But it was a gift that I won't ever forget. And then the lift began to peter out even further, and I began not to be able to stay in it at all, and so I headed out. I headed out over the big green field beneath me. And at this point, there was a differential in light. At my altitude, it was still quite light, but I could tell that in the farmers' paddocks below, it was beginning to get, not twilight, but definitely darker. So I did a couple of big boxings of the area, and then I came in for a nondescript landing, just fine. I do remember when I landed, holy smokes, the mosquitoes were just, wow! So that is almost the end of the story, but there is one more thing. So now here I am at the bottom of the hill, and I've put my glider away. It's now a 12-foot long burrito, essentially. and it's sitting in a farmer's field. I need to walk up to the top of the hill and get my car. So I climb the fence up onto the dirt road and start walking toward the keyhole in the cliff face, and I'm kind of lost in thought. It's it's edging now toward twilight, not quite, but getting there. And now I'm behind the ridge. I've entered the side of the ridge, and I'm walking essentially behind the face of it now, up on a very long dirt road that just keeps climbing. And it's silent. There's no sound. And up ahead, about 100 feet, give or take, there was a rabbit, a jackrabbit. And I'm a kid from the East, and it might seem strange, but I don't know that I had ever seen a jackrabbit. A jackrabbit is a rabbit with very long ears. They look a little muscular and different than the rabbits that I'm used to. Anyway, I was kind of marveling at this rabbit, and I was getting closer and closer. I was probably in the neighborhood of 50 feet away from it, and then something happened that was the most amazing thing. A golden eagle came down and crashed into this rabbit. When I mean crashed, it came down with its talons and grabbed hold of the rabbit and did not take off, but instead tumbled. Probably 10 feet worth of tumbling, and then recovered and stood up on the rabbit, looked around, was like, huh. And then this huge animal with a, I don't know, 6-8 foot wingspan, I'm not sure, begins taking off, and he's taking off toward me. And he lifted off and flew probably, I don't know, 20 feet above my head with this rabbit hanging down. It was the most amazing thing. I'll remember that day. I'll remember that day. Anyway, thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.